All right, so if you're just joining us, right now we're watching some Finnish glass blowers from the Iittala glass factory. Juha is finishing up this bird right now, and they're making birds designed by Oiva Toikka. So Oiva Toikka is one of the most famous designers of Finnish glass, and these birds are one of his most well-known designs. In fact, Oiva Toikka has designed over 450 styles of birds since the early 70s, and they've been in production in Iittala as a very popular collectible piece of glass. So Juha is putting the finishing touches on this one here. He's just made a tail feathers, and he uses a hot torch to fire polish where he's sheared it and to keep the piece warm. If that piece drops below 1,000 degrees, it's in danger of breaking. So we don't want it to get too cold. So he uses that torch to heat it up. And often he goes back to the furnace, the reheating furnace, to heat that up again. So Helena is coming over. She's also one of the glass blowers from Iittala. And she's bringing over a bit for the beak. So these birds they're making right now, this bird has sort of its head cocked over. It's got a little attitude. I like that one. Now, what they're doing right now, you see, is taking a torch that's just natural gas and air, not forced air, and they've essentially torched the piece to reduce some of the colors. So some of the colors in there have metallic agents in them, or metal oxides that come to the surface when they're in a reduction or gassy atmosphere. So that gas flame pulls the metals to the surface, and it makes it look kind of shiny and metallic. So you can see that beak almost looks like it's it has a metallic sheen to it now because those oxides are now on the surface. So Juha is taking a file, he's scoring the neckline that he made earlier. That's a constriction where we break it free from the blowpipe. A couple drops of water. He takes his tongs, bonks the bird free from the pipe. And now there's a little hole at the bottom. That's the hole he was blowing into to inflate that glass bubble. These birds are all hollow. Otherwise, they'd be really, really heavy. So this is a great way to make these through blowing. It's a great way to express the process of glass blowing. So Juha is now, he's fire polishing that little hole because it's got a jagged, broken edge. Once it's smooth and soft, he's going to flatten it out by pushing it into a graphite pad. And that's going to ensure that it sits nice and flat on a table. All right, let's hear it for Juha. Okay, so we're getting right back into it. Helena is making another bird. They're just making one right after the other. Now in the factory, one would already be starting at this bench while that one is being finished. Right now they're sort of taking turns and taking it slow, but one of the cool things about the production of these birds is that each glassblower makes the piece from start to finish all the way through, which is an unusual system for production. It's very nice because you can, the maker can be just as attached to the piece as the designer. All right, so Helena starts the piece. She's gathered glass out of the furnace, and very quickly she's blown a bubble into the glass, forming a hollow bubble of glass. There you see, about the size of a racquetball. Now, if Helena wanted to make a small bird, this would probably be enough glass for that, or a little drinking glass or something, but she wants to make a bird that has a good size, similar to these ones that you see here. So she's going to let that bubble cool down a bit. And then Helena will go back into the furnace and gather up some more glass so she has enough to make this bird. What kind of bird is next, do you know? Now it's Sula.
Sulo.
Sulo.
Yeah, I liked you before.
Oh, you did? Okay. 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 With the legs. Okay, yeah, it's got the legs. Okay, so some of the birds have these pedestals that they stand on. So it's to emulate the type of birds that have sort of long legs. It's kind of a neat little feature. And they make these in a very special way. They set the bubble up on a post gather, which is they basically make a bubble with a neck in it, and they gather the glass on the tip of the bubble. So it's a different way for setting up the bird than the last one you just saw. So Helena goes in, she's gathering up some more glass. And in just a moment, she's going to take that molten glass and roll it through some crushed up and pulverized glass called powder. I'm just going to turn that on for you. Yeah, there you go. All right, so when you take a big bubble like that and you roll it through powder, it tends to create some dust. And you don't want to breathe fine powdered glass dust. So we have this booth over here that sucks it into a filter and blows out clean air. So it keeps the dust down. We don't want that dust all over the place. So we have powders here on the table, but they're gathering very small amounts and rolling those through, so it doesn't really create the dust that the big bubble can. So Helena has coated that in powder. Not sure what color that was. Let's just check. Oh, it looks like one of the reds, so maybe like a ruby color. Could be like this color here. This is a really beautiful one here. So all these pieces here on the stage, they made yesterday. So everything they make has to cool down very slowly. These pieces were put in the oven after they made them. They cooled down overnight, and we were able to pull them out this morning. So after Helena finishes the bird that she's working on, that's going to have to go into an oven and cool down too. So and every piece that you see in this collection at the museum had to go through the same type of cooling process. That process is called annealing. So annealing the glass is a way to slowly cool it and remove the stress and strain that could break the glass. So this tool is for cutting constrictions. These are called jacks. And Helena brought some special jacks from the factory. These are made of graphite. They have graphite blades. And the graphite blades help to kind of cool the glass down quicker. It also rides very, very smoothly on the surface of the glass. So it's a great material to use for glass making. And she's just setting this bubble up so that she can fit it into a mold. So this mold is a roughing mold. It roughs out the shape for a lot of different birds they make. That have this sort of pedestal base. And that base emulates sort of long legs on a bird. So if they were going to do like a flamingo or an ibis or something like that, they put it into this mold. If you're just joining us, we have some glass blowers here from Iittala Glass Factory in Finland. And they're executing the designs of the famous glass designer Oiva Toikka, and they're making his birds here. Oiva Toikka is a well-known name in Finnish design, and he's probably one of the most famous designers of glass in Finland. And these birds are what he's best known for. He's been making these birds at Iittala since the early 70s. The first bird that Oiva Toikka made was in 1971. And then they went into production in 1972. It quickly became a very popular decorative item. All right, so it comes out of the mold with its rough shape. Kind of looks like a bubblegum bubble on a stand. But that's going to change here pretty quickly. So Helena's going to reheat the glass. And you'll see the process of glass blowing is very rhythmic. We're all constantly going back and forth between the furnace and the working bench. So the heat from the furnace softens the glass and makes it so the glass blower can shape and form it as they please. And after a couple minutes, the glass stiffens up so that it can no longer be shaped. So have to go back to the furnace to reheat. And here we are. Helena is reheating the top portion of this bird. So I was telling some folks before, one of the cool parts about our demonstration here is our AV presentation. So you can really see the details, including this shot inside the glory hole, inside the reheating furnace. You can actually see how each glass blower reheats, how they turn it, how fast, and how deep. And once it's soft enough, Helena comes out and she goes to form the shape of the bird's body, starting by ovalizing it. That tool she's using right there is a very sophisticated tool called the newspaper. It's just folded up layers of newspaper, maybe 7 or 8 sheets that have been folded into a square and soaked in water. This is one of the greatest tools for shaping glass. It's the closest you can get to feeling the glass in your hands. So as I was saying, this is a rhythmic process. You can see Helena has just a little bit of time to work with the glass before it needs to be reheated again. And that's for a couple reasons. So as I said before, the glass becomes stiff as it's out here cooling, but it's also starting to become thermally shocked. It's cooling down too quickly, a lot quicker than it wants to, meaning that it could break. So at a certain point, with experience, you know that you have to go back and reheat. Otherwise, the piece could crack. I at least need water. Sure. All right, so Helena is now using a high-powered torch here. And like I said, you don't want any part to get too cold. That blowpipe that the piece is attached to is made out of stainless steel, and that stainless steel is going to suck a lot of the heat out of the glass. It acts as a heat sink, so it robs the heat of the glass. So she uses that torch to superheat that portion that's down near the blowpipe in order to keep it warm enough so it doesn't break. So now they're adding a little bit of glass, and I believe this will be the head. So the main portion of that bubble is probably maybe around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That fresh glass is around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and then she's also hitting it with that high-powered torch again. The hottest portion of that torch is probably about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So that little ball they just added is the hottest part. So Helena can blow into the glass. The glass that's colder and stiffer will not move, but the soft glass that they just added is going to start to blow out. So that forms the head and the neck of the bird. It's a very clever way to get different forms on the glass. And this technique is very, very old. You can see it in involved glass from the 16th century, I believe, where they would put prunts on pieces and blow them out and stretch them. And there's a specific type of beaker called a claw beaker that used this technique many hundreds of years ago. This is just a contemporary way to use it.
The hot shops, like the benches and everything else set up there?
Oh, no. They have some standing benches, but mostly it's just... Czech Republic, that's their tradition, is standing all
very similar to the way they work. Yeah. I don't know. Sure. Yeah. No, I can finish this. I'll just grab it. I should have had a glass here.
All right, so Helena's applied the tail feathers. Anytime we use the shears on the glass, it can leave a little jagged mark. So she uses that fire polish torch just to heat away those shear edges. Makes it nice and smooth. So we've got the head, we've got the tail, and it looks like Juha is gathering up some more glass, and I'm guessing that's going to be the beak for the bird. So they have some really cool mashers there, or crimps to flatten out the bit. Those are made of graphite too, so they use a lot of graphite tools in the production of these birds. Graphite is a great material to use with glass. All right, so here comes the beak. Juha is helping her right now. Now Helena applies it, cuts it free. Again, there's a shear mark. So into the torch it goes to be smoothed and fire polished. And we're just about finished with this bird. Everything we make has to cool very slowly. I mentioned this before, and that process is called annealing. If Helena just set this out on the table for you to look at, it would cool down in about 10 minutes or 15 minutes so that you could touch it, but it would be in many pieces because glass experiences thermal shock. We don't want this piece to experience thermal shock and break, so we're going to place it into what's called an annealing oven. And that annealing oven will take this piece from its current state of 1,000 degrees down to room temperature over about 12 hours. All right, looks great. So make sure to check out the display in our glass market of Oiva Toikka's birds. Some of those may have even been made by Juha or Helena over in Finland at the Iittala glass factory. So these are Oiva Toikka's designs. All right, so there's the finished bird. Helena takes a file, scores the neckline she made very early on in the process. One of the first things she did. She'll bonk it off of there, soften the bottom with the flame, and then flatten it out so it stands upright. And then, as I said, it'll go into an oven to cool down very, very slowly for about 12 hours. All right, so let's hear it for Helena. Nice job. They're making one beautiful piece after the other. You can really see why people love these designs so much. So one cool thing here at the Corning Museum of Glass, we are offering an exclusive.
Well, we're back at it with Italia here. Welcome. We're giving Jeff a moment to kind of breathe on the mic, so he went to go and drink some water, but I'm here to help narrate through this process a little bit. Yes, I can see some people are getting a closer look at some of the birds that were made yesterday. They're fresh from the annealer. And I was talking to them a little bit about their color applications and how they're kind of exploring different color applications than what is in the series that we have on sale in the glass market. And the exciting thing about the series of birds that we have in the glass market, it's the first time that you can buy the set of 5 birds, all in one place. So this is kind of new for them, and that's why it's so exciting. So we have a lot of collectors coming in and asking us a lot of questions, and I find it really interesting to talk to collectors also about the whole, why it's so important to get the same batch number. And like, that's everything right there. Oh yeah, do you have number 86 there in the museum? No, we have number 87. Oh, nope, it's not gonna work. We need number 86 to finish our collection. But here, I mean, it's a one-stop shop. It's great. You can just go and it's all in one set and you're getting the same collection number. So that's exciting for the collectors that are out there that specifically collect the birds here. And these birds have been around and in production since the early 70s. And it's really cool to see how they've developed in the color application and the inspiration that came from all of them. The inspiration that came from the most recent series now, Oiva Toikka, he basically grabbed inspiration from city scenes, anything from cracks in a sidewalk to, I guess, beautiful windows, stained glass windows, anything that you could draw inspiration from to get the color patterns that you see now on the collection of the most recent series. There's 5 of them, 5 different series, or 5 different birds. And that's what we're going to be working on, is those different birds today, but we're playing around with different color applications as well. Now, one thing that I do want to point out is that the color that we're working with today is powdered glass. So it's like finely ground down as like baking soda, and it heats up immediately when the molten glass is rolled through it. It's kind of like sprinkles on an ice cream cone. We use that analogy a lot, but it's really accurate because that powder heats up immediately, sticks right onto the surface, and sprinkles, they just kind of immediately stick right onto the surface of the ice cream, because ice cream is almost kind of sticky. Well, hot glass is extremely sticky and also extremely hot, so that powder sticks right onto the surface, and the more layers we go through, the denser our color application becomes. And if you have all time today, you might be able to look around and see some of the color variants in some of the birds. Now, what these guys are doing right now, Juha and Helena, they're working together. They're from the factory Iittala, and they're blowing into a mold. They're blowing into a mold. This is one quick fire way to get the same piece over and over and over again. Think of it as like a Coke bottle. How do they make them all the same over and over again? You have a mold. That's how they create all the Coke bottles and the wine glasses and the wine bottles, just for example's sake. But there's just a mold with the negative cut out on the inside. Molds can come and be created from many different materials. We have some cast aluminum and cast bronze molds up here, but I think I saw, or do I smell cork, or is that graphite? Either way, it might be graphite inside that mold, but I can see once they blew into that mold heats up. So they immediately put it into a bucket of water to cool it back down, and that helps preserve that mold. You can line the inside of some molds with cork, and that kind of acts as a release. That way the hot glass doesn't stick inside of the mold. It doesn't get overheated, and when you're making a nice rounded mold like this, you can turn the iron. So if you're turning the iron and the mold starts to heat up, it starts to stick and grab at that glass, and then you can't turn it anymore. So that makes it really hard to keep everything round and symmetrical. But you can also line the inside with graphite. Graphite's a very soft material to work with glass, but it also soaks up the most amount of heat with glass as well. Mm-hmm. Now, even though we use the mold, we can still shape the glass using the heat from the furnace over there. We have a secondary furnace, that reheating chamber, and we can reheat the top half of that rounded bubble and start to flatten it and create the contoured shape for the bird body. So the mold's really nice because you have the same amount of glass every time. So your round bubble is always going to be the same no matter what. Now it's up to the skill of the glass artist to heat that top bubble and be able to flatten it the same every single time. You have to create just the same amount of pressure to flatten the bottle, or excuse me, the bubble itself. If you squeeze down too hard on that round bubble, you could just completely flatten it, and you can actually concave that bubble, and that's a little bit harder to fix. So they just know from their experience really how much pressure to apply to the glass, how hot to get it, and also what size bits to bring, and that's what Helena's doing right here. She's bringing over a bit to Juha. They're working together. This is just called bit work. You can kind of see why we're working with solid bits of glass that we present over to the main gaffer. And they can cut off exactly how much they need, and whatever excess glass is left on the end of the iron, because there's always a little bit left on the end of the iron. If it's clear, we recycle that right back into our melting tank. We just melt it all back down again. That glass breaks away from the metal, and we eventually just sift through it and throw it right back into the face of our furnace so it can all melt down again. But if there's a little bit of color on it, we try not to recycle that back into our melting tank, because then we'll have weird striations of blue and pink and brown and black and all the colors we've been using in every single piece throughout the rest of the week until we can work out all of that colored glass out of the furnace. So we really are very particular about what we recycle. There are glass artists out there that will recycle everything, and it's a cost reason. Glass is very expensive. This is a very expensive hobby to get into. So with that being said, it's not really a hobby to many people. It's a profession. This is a professional work environment. This is what people do to make a living working with this material because it's so expensive, but you become very passionate about it. So cost becomes no big deal to you because you need to work with this material to create the things that you want to make. It's a very unique material to work with in that respect because you cannot physically ever touch it to manipulate it. You have to use tools to act as an extension of your hands, so your hands can never really touch the hot molten glass. You can take a cold piece like these birds that are out of the annealing oven, and if they wanted to cut and engrave them and create the feather texture, they could do that. So that's the only way that you can actually physically manipulate it. But once again, you're not carving away at it with your hands, with chisels or anything like that. You're using giant lathes to actually manipulate that. So you can't form it with your hands. So it becomes very difficult in that regard because you're trying to figure out how to manipulate this material with using tools that have been around for over 2,000 years. And they haven't really changed. A lot of them haven't changed for over 2,000 years now. Many of the metals have changed, though, obviously. Most of the tools are made out of a stainless steel, which is a poor conductor of heat. We wouldn't want any copper tools up here. Copper really conducts the heat very well. If you're curious on what they're building right now, this is one of their birds in the collection, and they're just applying a beak. A fun thing about glass is as long as it's hot enough, it will stick to something else that's equally as hot, if not hotter. So hot glass sticks onto other things that are hot. So that beak is now permanently fused onto the body. And what Jussi's doing right here, Jussi does not work for Iittala, but he does work for the studio. And the studio is right across the street. And it's a world-renowned teaching facility for the Corning Museum of Glass area. So it's really great. There's teachers that come from all over, and they teach classes over there. But Jussi is one of the head techs, and he's over here helping out the team here today. So he just had the fluffy torch, we call it, that big aggressive torch, and that reduced the amount of oxygen in the environment, creating a nice shiny beak for them. So it brought out the metals in that color to make the beak very shiny. They're going to break this little bird off, and they're going to go ahead and start on another one, but they can't just break it off and let it sit on the table. It'll start to crack and break due to thermal shock. Speaking of thermal shock, that's what that was right there. A little bit of water on the end of that iron created enough stress and shock in the glass that a gentle tap broke that bird free. And we have this little Carlisle torch right here. Carlisle is the brand torch that they're using, and it's a nice kind of standard workhorse, if you will, sort of torch. You can get a lot done with it. And they'll put this piece inside of our oven that we turned on over here. There's 8 annealing ovens up here on our stage, and one is up to 910 degrees. Yeah, let's give them a little round of applause for that. That's a really nice finished product right there. Now the colors. Yeah, it's great. I just got a really great question. Thank you so much from this gentleman in our audience here. And he was curious about our annealing ovens. Whenever we put a piece of glass inside of the annealing oven, how long does it take for the glass to cool down? Well, that's a hard answer. It all just depends on the thickness of the glass and the kind of glass that you're working with as well. But thickness really does kind of help dictate how long the piece of glass should cool down. The largest piece of glass in our collection. Does anybody know what that piece is? I'm about to give you the answer, but does anybody know what the biggest piece of glass is? You walk by it, even in the Innovation Center, you walk under it in the glass market. It's the huge polymer telescope lens. It's that giant piece of glass, that huge disc. It looks like a huge honeycomb. Yeah. And it's a beautiful piece of glass. We have that telescope lens in our collection. It's the biggest piece of glass in our collection. That took over 11 months for that to cool down. 11 months, so almost over a year for that to cool down and completely be room temperature so they could touch it and polish it. But we have the first one that they made because the mold broke when they were ladling that molten glass. There's a team of around 30 glass artists that were ladling these huge giant ladles that I could probably like sit in. It'd be a bathtub for me, just these giant ladles, and ladling them into this huge mold, and the mold broke, which was just not fun for them. So they had to redo all of that all over again. But they made a second one, and the second one survived. Ooh, this is cool. I'll get it back into that annealing oven rant here in just a moment, but take a close look there. They added a little thread of glass onto the body of the piece to create some nice texture and a nice color application. You had to bring over that little bit of glass just hot enough in order for it to stretch evenly, in order for you to get the same diameter thread through and through the very end of, through the tip of the bubble to the very back where the glass is connected to the iron. And it's okay if it went on a little bit thicker towards the back of the iron. Where the glass really kind of matters is where it's off of the iron, because that's what's going to become detached off of the iron. But yes, back to the annealing ovens. And this gentleman, he was curious about how long these pieces need to cool down. They are hollow, so that does make them a little bit thinner. But we are giving them probably a safe annealing time of around 16 hours, probably maybe 12 to 16 hours. And that's a safe amount of time for it to cool down. They're not incredibly thick, and they're not incredibly large in order to make them cool down any slower. But the longer the amount of time you give them to cool down, it doesn't hurt it. It only hurts the glass when you don't give it enough time to cool down. If you only give it 6 hours to cool down, because then you didn't allow that thermal shock to really resolve itself. Oh, fun. Now, if you look here on the floor, Helena, she's dripping the glass into an optic mold that has points on the inside. You can see they look like little teeth. And they kind of they draw lines, straight lines on the glass, but she lifted the iron up slowly out of that mold and turned in one direction, and that created friction between the teeth on the inside and the glass, and she was able to twist those once straight indents in the glass, and she twisted them to create this really nice pattern with that color thread wrap on the surface of the glass. And she can continue to wrap and twist this color around using the friction between the glass and the metal table, that marver over there. And we have a couple different marvers up here on stage, and the marvers are just a thick plate of steel. They don't bend or warp due to the heat, even though there's 2,000 degree glass touching metal, you would assume it would warp. It's just so thick it doesn't at all. So we're really happy about that. And you can use other materials to shape the glass, a flat surface. You can use a marble table if you want, but you have to be kind of careful about how often and how much you interact with that marble table with 2,000 degrees, because marble being a porous material, it can expand and contract and you can cause it to break. Now, if we want to make this a nice even round bubble, we can use the help of a block, which is a solid block of wood that's kind of cut into a giant spoon shape or a big ladle. And it's completely waterlogged, and Helena was just using it there a moment ago to round out the shape of her gather, to even it out. And we get those tools made for us by a company called Blockhead, which is only appropriate. They're blocks, why not? But they're just cut from a solid block of wood, and she has some blocks in front of her bench and behind the bench, and they're all different sizes to accommodate the amount of glass that's on the end of your iron. Now, as she slows down the rotation of the turn, we have a great AV team up here with cameras on the floor, and they can kind of zoom in on the color application for you so you can see a better look at it. But right now, for the most part, I can't really ask Helena to stop turning the iron for you all to get a better look at it. What do you think would happen to the glass if she stopped turning the iron? Exactly. Yeah, I had a few faces and a few hand gestures of what would happen. It would just drip right onto the floor. It would throw the bubble off center. I mean, it's just like honey on the end of a honeycomb stick. You have to keep on turning that little honeycomb stick in order for it to stay on there. I know nobody gathers honey on the end of a honeycomb stick anymore. They just have the honey squirt bear things, and they just squirt the honey out, but that's another way of gathering honey. So that's what we like to relate it to. It's just a bowl of honey and a little stick of, like we say, chopstick of honey as well. You just have to turn that chopstick or the little honeycomb stick to keep the honey on the end of that chopstick. With us, we absolutely have to turn the iron to keep the glass on the end. Working with gravity here, see how she's letting it fall back and forth. She's able to poke and prod the glass, cut little indents into it. Now, whenever you cut through glass, you have to make sure that the glass is hot enough. Otherwise, you're damaging your tools. Now, once again, they're just stainless steel tools. They're not like, cast in some sort of special metal that makes them able to cut through cold glass or something like that. They're just shears. You can actually cut through hot glass with a pair of shears that you can, or scissors that you buy from an office supply store, as long as it's stainless steel, of course. But it will cut through the glass very easily. Once again, if the glass is hot enough. Now, Helena knows just from her experience, she's been working with glass for almost 10 years now, how hot to get the glass in order for her to be able to easily cut through it. And she had to work very quickly right there. You notice how that was maybe only 30 seconds at the bench? You immediately are soaking up a lot of the heat from the glass by using those metal tools, by poking and prodding it, by letting it sit out in the open air. We have these air vents that are down over here on the floor, and it's really nice. We're kind of spoiled glass blowers. We have AC for our glass blowers. You do not always find that in every hot shop. So it's nice because it's cooling down Helena as she's working, but it's also blowing on the glass. So we have to be very careful about how often or how long we stay outside of that furnace heat. Now she's stretching out the tail for our bird, and she's using a set of specialized jacks. Jacks are like the normal jacks that we work with, the standard jacks, if you will, those are made out of stainless steel. They're like 2 blunt butter knives attached to tweezer handles. But those jacks that she's working with right now, they're like 2 kind of, they look like stylized graphite pads, and they are cut to a nice sort of sharp shape on the inside to help her cut in a nice line in the glass. Whatever, doesn't matter. Okay.
Oh, that's a good question. So what's the difference between this furnace and this furnace? Not really much. This one's a little bigger, but for what they're doing, it's not really the furnace that makes a difference. It's the setup of the workstation. So they have a nice torch there for finishing up, cleaning up the shear marks and then finishing the bottoms of the pieces. And they have different tools over at that bench than what they have here. So at the Iittala factory, when they work, they have a place just like this. It's set up just like this, where they start the pieces at one bench and then they finish them at the other pieces. The unusual thing about how they make these too is normally in the factory setting, one artisan will start the piece, another one will finish the piece, another one will make the handle, or however the process goes, but the labor is divided, so there's specializations. But the way these pieces are designed and the way the production is done is that one artisan starts the piece and takes it all the way to the end. So they have an investment in the piece as well. So it's kind of a nice feature of Oiva Toikka's designs. All right, so Helena is doing some finishing touches there on the bottom. She flattened it out so it sits on the table nice and flat. She's cleaning up the tail of this bird. And using the torch just to superheat the constriction she made earlier. She's going to chop that in a little bit more so that breaks off easily.
Is this a specialized glass or just?
It's regular soda lime.
Yep, the question was, is this a special type of glass? This is our normal soda lime glass. And I asked Helena yesterday if it's similar to the glass that they use at Iittala, and she said that this glass goes longer, so it stays hot longer and it stays soft longer. So normally in a factory setting, you have a glass that'll set up quickly so that when you blow it into a mold, it doesn't distort very much. This is more designed for making artistic sculptures so that you have more time to work with it. All right, so Jussi has gathered up some more glass, and I'm guessing that's going to be for the head of the bird and the beak. So you can see the torch is really integral to the process of finishing off these birds. And there's a little hole right there in the top, and that was the hole that Helena was blowing into to form the glass bubble. All these birds are hollow inside, so if you didn't know that, they're actually hollow. So that keeps them lightweight. If these were solid birds, that bird would probably weigh about 5 pounds. As it is, it might weigh 2 pounds. So here comes a bit, and you can see how Helena stretches that out. and makes it a thin little veneer to kind of cap off that hole. That becomes the head of the bird. And then Jussi has another bit here with a different color, and that's going to become the beak. And you can see Helena has this sort of tong-like tool that she's holding the bird with. In standard glass blowing, we would attach a little bit of glass on the end of a rod to that, and we would puntee that. But for production purposes, they use these tongs. It's a really neat and specialized tool. It almost looks like the tongs grabbers are wrapped in shoestrings, but those are actually that fabric is made of Kevlar, so it stands up to the incredible heat of the glass. That thing is still around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So you wouldn't want to touch that with your bare hands. You would not want to touch it with tongs that have shoestrings on them, because the shoestrings would just burn away. All right, so Juha has some loading forks. They also have a high temperature fabric on there. And every piece of glass we make has to be cooled very slowly. So let's hear it for Helena. It's a beautiful bird. Now, Juha places it into an oven. That oven is around 900 degrees Fahrenheit. That will cool that piece down. That process is called annealing. So again, Helena welling. And we have Juha Saarikko from Iittala, which is a glass factory in Finland. And they're making the... All right, so here we are. Elena's got the glass she needs to make the next bird. She's just rolled the glass through some crushed up colored glass called frit. And this is going to give the bird a nice speckled pattern on the surface. So she reheats that until those little chunks of glass melt thoroughly. And then Helena will shape this using a wooden tool called a block. Now, all the wood tools we use here in the studio are made out of fruit wood. And we like fruit wood because it has a really fine grain and also holds a lot of water. And we like to keep the tools wet so they don't burn away with the intense heat of the glass. In fact, when Helena is using this tool, you can see it's not burning at all. You don't see any smoke rising off that. When you do see smoke, the glass blower will dip the tool back in the water, because the glass is not actually touching the wood. It's drawing water out of the wood, and it's riding on a layer of steam. This is called the Lindenfrost effect. And it really helps to keep those tools riding smoothly on the surface and keeping them from charring and burning. All right, so this is a split-tail bird of some type, a new little guy. Or maybe that's, I don't even know if that's a tail. This is one I have not seen yet. Oh, I think that it's the same as the last one, but they go back together. All right, so there's the tail, just like that. 2 or 3 little moves. You can't take too much time because you only have a limited time to work with the glass before it needs to go back into the furnace for a reheat. It's the heat that keeps the glass soft and malleable. So when you see a ceramicist making a pot, you see they'll splash water on the clay to keep it wet, and the wetness keeps the clay soft. It's the heat in glass, and it's the fire that keeps the glass soft. So it's almost the opposite in some ways. Very similar, but also almost the opposite. And you can see how she flips it back and forth. She doesn't want the form to distort, so she doesn't spin it in one direction. Now using this bladed tool, these are graphite jacks. She's going to pull a neck out. you can very easily start to see that bird's form emerging from this glass bubble that was once round. And then she can blow into it. It almost looks like the bird's taking a deep breath when she breathes into that. It's pretty neat. Just puffs out the chest there when she does that. So again, just a little reminder, we have some special guest artists here, glassblowers from the Iittala factory in Finland. Right now, Helena Welling is making a bird, and they're working on Oiva Toikka's designs here. And the birds are one of Oiva Toikka's most well-known designs in glass. He's designed over 400 different styles of birds that have been put into production at Iittala factory. But he's also got many other lines too. And you can see a lot of pieces that have been designed by Oiva Toikka here in the collection at the museum. So he's a very, very well-known, famous Finnish designer. But you can actually find these birds right out in our glass market. So if you're interested in collecting them yourself, today is a good opportunity to start your Oiva Toikka collection. Oiva Toikka is a very well-known and renowned Finnish designer, 85 years old. He doesn't really travel anymore, otherwise he'd be here with us today. But he's back home. He's probably watching the live stream. Who knows, maybe, maybe not. All right, so Helena is superheating that neck with a torch there. She's going to take some shears and just crimp that in a little tighter. This ensures that when she goes to break this off of that iron, it breaks nice and cleanly. So she constricts that in. Now they have this special tool they use. These large tongs with O-shaped grabbers. And she just grab onto the body of the bird. Sharp tap to the iron, breaks it right free. And now comes the head of the bird. So as similar as the process is, when Juha makes one, it's a little bit different than when Helena makes one. They each have their own style. They each use a little bit different system, but very similar. Everybody understands the material a little bit differently. There's subtle differences that only the glassmaker, maybe Oiva Toikka himself, and perhaps some of the most avid collectors would be able to distinguish between different makers. And here comes the beak. You can really see how that glass stretches when it's hot. It's just like taffy. Unlike taffy, though, it won't stick to your skin. It'll just burn it really badly. So we try not to touch it or put it in our mouths like taffy. All right, so some finishing touches using a graphite paddle. They use a lot of graphite tools in the process. Graphite is a really, really good tool for shaping glass. It doesn't really leave marks at all. Very smooth. And it does help to take some of the heat out of the glass, so it's very good for certain processes where you want the glass to cool quickly. All right, there we have the finished, beautiful bird. Nice job, Helena. All right, into the oven it goes. Everything we make has to cool down very slowly. So we place this into an annealing oven where it'll cool down overnight from about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit down to room temperature. That takes about 12 hours. All right, for those of you checking out, thanks for stopping by. We're going to be at it all day. Stop back again and see some other birds. And it looks like we're just about at lunchtime here. So let's give them one more round of applause for a great morning of work. Nice job to our Finnish friends, Helena, Juha, and Jussi. Nice job, guys.